Afternoon, evening, colleagues, excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Just to indicate that we are running a few minutes behind time and we beg your indulgence. The Director General will be joining us in a moment and we shall get underway. So I just beg your indulgence for a few more minutes. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished colleagues, friends, thank you very much for indulging us in being a little bit delayed this morning. It's my very warm and pleasure to introduce the information session COVID-19 for today, the 9th of July. A somewhat special session today. As you will have seen from the draft agenda that was shared with you, we have two main presentations. The first will be from the Director General, Dr. Tedros, on the COVID-19 response evaluation process. That will then be followed by an update on the ACT COVAX pillar. We will have these two sessions in discrete sessions, so question and answers will follow each of the two segments. I would like to also indicate that because of the huge international interest in the COVID response and the evaluation, we are broadcasting the Director General's introductory remarks in the speech, but will not be broadcasting the Member State question and answer section. So with that, it is my very warm introduction to Dr. Tedros for his remarks. Over to you, DG.
Thank you, Tim. Honorable Ministers, Excellencies, dear colleagues and friends, the COVID-19 pandemic has left no country untouched. It has humbled all of us. It's often said that disease knows no borders. It does not care about our political differences, and it disregards the distinctions we draw between health and economy, lives and livelihoods. The COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted them all. It has exploited the inequalities in our health systems and the schisms in our societies. It has exposed existing inequities, widening and deepening the cracks between us. This once-in-a-century pandemic has hammered home a critical lesson. When it comes to health, our destinies are intertwined. The virus has upended health systems in some of the world's wealthiest nations, while some countries that have mounted a successful response have been of modest means. We know that when countries take a comprehensive approach based on fundamental public health measures, such as find, isolate, test, and treat cases and trace and quarantine contacts, the outbreak can be brought under control. But in most of the world, the virus is not under control. It's getting worse. More than 11.8 million cases of COVID-19 have now been reported to WHO. More than 544,000 lives have been lost. And the pandemic is still accelerating. The total number of cases has doubled in the last 6 weeks. Since this outbreak began, led by our hero health workers, countries have worked around the clock to save lives, day and night. I will never forget the images of health workers who wore a mask for so long while on shift that they had marks, bruises imprinted on their face, and saving lives while risking their own life. And we have lost many health workers, actually. And also colleagues at WHO, moved by this, working tirelessly to coordinate the global response, to provide evidence-based scientific and technical guidance, catalyze research. And many of our colleagues said to me, our inspiration and energy comes actually from those in the front line who are fighting the COVID day and night, risking their lives. And that's why we work in WHO day and night. Everyone is fighting hard against the virus, but so many lives have been lost. But the health effects of the pandemic go far beyond the suffering caused by the virus itself. It's unraveling many of the gains we have made fighting some of the world's most devastating diseases. Hundreds of millions of children are at risk of missing out on routine vaccines for tuberculosis, pneumonia, measles, polio, cholera, diarrhea, and others. Many countries are running low on HIV medicines. Refugees are among the most vulnerable to the pandemic, already facing limited access to adequate shelter, water, nutrition, sanitation, and health services. COVID-19 could push them over the brink. And around the world, in countries rich and poor, many more people are now going hungry. We can see poverty visibly now. Of course, it has been there. With estimates from the World Food Programme that global hunger could increase to more than 270 million people. These are not numbers, these are people. As countries struggle with this unprecedented threat, they face a delicate balance between protecting their people and maintaining essential health services, while minimizing social and economic damage and respecting human rights. There are no easy answers. There are no quick fixes. But some nations have brought the virus under control. We must learn from their experience and follow their lead. As a global community, we must learn from both the positive efforts made to suppress the virus and the challenges that have emerged from this global hardship. It has been made devastatingly clear that the best defense against health emergencies is a strong health system. A strong health system is a resilient health system. That's why national governments and local governments need to invest in preparedness and essential public health functions. Universal health coverage is essential to our collective global health security. Health for all. That was the hallmark of WHO since more than 70 years ago is the answer. After every outbreak in recent history, there are lessons that we have learned to protect ourselves better. And the world has made some progress in pandemic preparedness. But it's also clear that we have much more work to do. For years, many of us warned that a catastrophic respiratory pandemic was inevitable. People from the health sector, even outside the health sector, many of our leaders warned about a catastrophic pandemic. It was not a question of if, but when. But still, despite all the warnings, the world was not ready. Our systems were not ready. Our communities were not ready. Our supply chains collapsed. It's time for a very honest reflection. All of us must look in the mirror. WHO, every member state, all involved in the response, everyone. We're in the midst of this battle, the battle of our lives. And we have to do better, not just now, but for the future. Because these threats will never stop. And in all likelihood, they will get worse. but it's in our hands. We make the choices. We need to look at the performance of our national surveillance and response systems, how we share information with our communities, and whether we earn their trust, how we govern, and whether our global health architecture is fit for purpose. These are very important. But the most important is, are we ready to have an honest reflection? Each one of us, everybody, are we ready to learn the big lessons? And can we honestly do it? In May, as you know, the world came together for the first virtual World Health Assembly. And 194 member states passed a landmark resolution which recognized the leadership role of WHO and the role of the United Nations system in coordinating the comprehensive global response. It called on member states to implement a whole-of-government and whole-of-society approach to ensure a more coherent, fairer, and effective global response. It called for the fair distribution of vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. In line with our call for after-action review, member states also agreed that WHO should initiate an independent and comprehensive evaluation of the lessons learned from the international health response to COVID-19. This is a time for self-reflection, to look at the world we live in and to find ways to strengthen our collaboration as we work together to save lives and bring this pandemic under control. Together, we now have a once-in-a-generation opportunity to prove to each other that we can be greater than the sum of our parts. The magnitude of this pandemic, which has touched virtually everyone in the world, clearly deserves a commensurate evaluation, an honest evaluation. This is not a standard report that ticks a box and is then put on a shelf to gather dust. This is something we take seriously. We learn honestly, and we follow through too. Honest to the assessment, and honest to the follow-through and implementation. That's what's required. With this in mind, I'm proud to announce that former Prime Minister Helen Clark and former President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, and also a Nobel laureate, have agreed to serve as co-chairs of the evaluation committee, which we're calling the Independent Panel for Pandemic Preparedness and Response, IPPR. Prime Minister Clark of New Zealand went on to lead the United Nations Development Programme, as you know. And President Sirleaf of Liberia, as I said earlier, is a recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize. Of course, we'll be hearing from them shortly. But I was so proud that these two distinguished ladies have accepted the challenge and agreed to lead the panel. Prime Minister Clark and President Sirleaf were selected through a process of broad informal consultation with member states and world experts. I cannot imagine two more strong-minded independent leaders to help guide us through this critical learning process. To help us understand what happened, an honest assessment, and to help us understand also what we should do to prevent such a tragedy in the future. So collectively, as a world, to say never again to such kind of tragedy. And I thank you both, Prime Minister and President, for accepting to lead this very important panel. And I look forward to working with you and helping you in any way possible, putting WHO as an open book so that you can have full access, so you can see what was done. And also calling for all member states to open up and show them everything as an open book, so we understand everything honestly and truthfully. And I have also the following proposals for how the panel can take its work forward. The terms of reference for the panel will be developed in consultation with member states. And of course, the co-chairs will take the lead, since they are now in the lead. And I propose the co-chairs will select the other members of the panel. Of course, we encourage all member states to offer suggestions for world-class candidates that can fulfill the panel, that can fulfill the role to be members of the panel, that can be considered by the co-chairs. Having a longer list, a big reservoir, helps to select the best panel members that can help our distinguished two co-chairs. I also propose that the panel will have an independent secretariat. As you know, in the past we used to have our internal independent evaluation department that would serve as secretariat in independent evaluations. But as I say, this is a very unique situation. And I propose to have an independent secretariat that's fully accountable to the two co-chairs and the panel. And to keep member states up to date on the progress and any interim findings, I propose that we have one mission briefing per month dedicated to updates on implementation of the resolution and for consultation. I have also consulted with Dr. Vardhan, the chair of the executive board, in the context of the ongoing and unprecedented public health emergency relating to COVID-19. In line with what Dr. Vardhan and I agreed, I'm proposing to call a special session of the executive board in September to discuss progress and to give guidance. And in November, we will resume the World Health Assembly, and the independent panel will present an interim report. In January, the executive board will hold its regular session where we will further discuss the panel's work. In May next year, the World Health Assembly, the panel, will present its substantive report to the health findings. Of course, this is a broad milestone until next year, May, but the panel co-chairs will decide on the details and even on the need beyond May. While the independent evaluation panel performs its work, there are obvious low-hanging fruits that can be acted on, such as universal peer review and the binary FIC mechanism for the international health regulations, which we have already started working on. Member states, you remember, we're discussing on this issue, and we need to really move on. And the Independent Oversight and Advisory Committee for the WHO Health Emergencies Program will also continue its existing work. As you remember, it has already reported its work from January to April. Even as we fight this pandemic, we must be readying ourselves for future global outbreaks and the many other challenges of our time, such as antimicrobial resistance, inequality, and the climate crisis. COVID-19 has taken so much from us, but it's also giving us an opportunity to break with the past and build back better. I want us to see this as opportunity. It's a crisis, but opportunities are born from crisis. We cannot go back to the way we did things before, my friends. Business as usual has failed us. This cannot be another blue ribbon panel that issues a report that goes up on the bookshelf. We must come together in a global conversation to take these hard-won lessons and turn them into action. My friends, make no mistake. The greatest threat we face now is not the virus itself. Rather, it's the lack of leadership and solidarity at the global and national levels. That's why I said earlier, each and every individual should reflect. This is a tragedy that actually is forcing us to miss many of our friends, losing many lives. And we cannot defeat this pandemic as a divided world. The COVID-19 pandemic is a test of global solidarity and global leadership. The virus thrives on division, but is thwarted when we unite. How is it difficult for humans to unite to fight a common enemy that's killing people indiscriminately? Are we unable to distinguish or identify the common enemy? Can't we understand that the divisions or the cracks between us actually are the advantage for the virus? I think I don't need to remind you, because we all know that that's the basics. My hope is that the defining crisis of our age will likewise remind all people that the best way forward and the only way forward is together. It's the basics, but a time-tested truth. Together is the solution, unless we want to give the advantage to the enemy, to the virus that has taken the world hostage. And this has to stop. And now we will hear from our co-chairs, former Prime Minister Helen Clark and former President and Nobel laureate President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. And again, my gratitude and appreciation for accepting this challenge. I know through you, the world will understand the truth, what happened, and also the solutions to build our future better as one humanity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, DG, for those very important and powerful words this morning. It is now my honour to invite Her Excellency Helen Clark to take the floor. Excellency, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Director General, for the trust that you and those you've consulted have placed in me and my co-chair, President Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, for this assignment, which could only be described as exceptionally challenging. And that's because, as you have outlined so eloquently just now, our world is challenged by what is happening. Challenged in ways none of us could have forecast, sitting where we are even 6 months ago. So understanding what has happened, how we've responded as an international community, what the future holds, how we can best prepare for that future is absolutely vital now. And I hope the panel that we as co-chairs can bring together can help to build that understanding of moving forward. I speak as someone who is very strongly committed to the multilateral system. I want to see it do well. I believe it exists because we acknowledge that there are challenges and problems that no nation state can resolve on its own. We have to cooperate, and if our panel can contribute to reinforcing the need for multilateralism and its effectiveness, then I think we will have done our job. So thank you for the confidence placed in me, and I'm happy to hand over now to co-chair, President Johnson Sirleaf.
Thank you very much, Excellency Helen Clark. It is now my honour to introduce Her Excellency Ellen Johnson Sirleaf. Your Excellency, you have the floor. You have the floor, Excellency.
Am I unmuted now?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I'm honored to join Prime Minister Helen Clark to undertake this important and challenging assignment. I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to doing all we can to respond to these challenges that have prevented us from being united in moving forward, not only to address the effects of COVID-19, but to ensure a better health system for all nations of the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Excellency. It is now time where we have an opportunity for questions from you, the member states. So I think as each week, Jude will be here to assist with the moderation, and we open the floor now for any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Chair. I recognize Australia. You have the floor, please.
Thank you very much indeed, Director General Tedros, for your introductory comments and for all of the work that you and colleagues have done in getting us to this important stage. We certainly welcome very warmly indeed the appointment of the independent co-chairs, and it's really fantastic to see the two who have accepted the challenge, and our thanks to you. This is an incredibly important step that you will be leading as we move forward to understand what has happened and also to try and put us all in a better place going forward. We also very much look forward, and I thank the Director General for his suggestion that the panel be in a position to brief Member States regularly on the processes and to understand how we can best contribute and participate. As I think you've made very clear, Director General, this is something that all of us have a stake in, and so understanding how we can best engage will be really important. I'm sure too that the two esteemed co-chairs will indeed take a stepwise approach and be very respectful of the timing and the fact that so many people are indeed still battling these growing numbers. So just to say, we very much welcome the two panellists. We thank them for agreeing to take on this incredibly important role, and Director General, to you and to your staff, our thanks for steering us through to this point. I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. I'll read out the list of countries who've requested for the floor. I have UK, Japan, Switzerland, New Zealand, Canada, and the EU. UK, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Dr. Tedros, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as friends and supporters of the WHO, the UK warmly welcomes today's announcement and welcomes the distinguished co-chairs to their very important new role. COVID-19 has posed an unprecedented health challenge with deep social and economic consequences as well. It is vital that we continue to maintain our focus on the immediate COVID-19 response, the direct impacts, and also the potentially much greater indirect impacts. It is vital that we learn the lessons of the pandemic. This is both to further improve our response to COVID-19, but also to allow us to prepare better for future pandemics. The UK therefore strongly welcomes today's announcement. It is a significant step forward in standing up necessary COVID-19 reviews. It demonstrates the commitment from the WHO to review and to learn from this pandemic. The UK stresses the need for the review to be independent, to garner wide support from across the international community, to be thorough, and to provide recommendations for improvement as soon as they emerge, so that, together, we may take them forward. The UK looks forward to working with the WHO and Member States on realising this reality. We must, of course, balance this with, and not lose sight of, the wider critical work on which the WHO leads, and the UK looks forward to continued engagement and leadership from the WHO on all global health. Thank you.
Thank you, UK. May I now invite the European Union to be followed by Japan. EU, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. And thanks, first of all, to everyone who is active in the response of this pandemic. I would like to use this opportunity to once again thank those who are active in the response. I would also like to thank you very much for appointing the chairs for an independent evaluation panel. We congratulate the two excellencies and are looking forward to working together and learning lessons from this pandemic to be better prepared in the future. In line with the resolution adopted at the World Health Assembly in May, we appreciate that Member States will be engaged in the development of the terms of reference in a plan for the evaluation panel. We are looking forward to engaging in an inclusive, transparent way with regular missions briefing and consultations. That is really helpful. And we hope that we will soon see a draft document to form the basis of our discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, European Union. I now invite Japan to be followed by Switzerland. Japan, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me thank Dr. Tedros for today's announcement. Japan, we welcome the announcement of two very distinguished co-chairs of the high-level independent panel. We consider that the international community must be united in dealing with the current pandemic. And for this, it is absolutely essential that the WHO functions in the most effective manner. While dealing with the current crisis is a priority, we also consider that in order to deal with the future pandemics more effectively, it is absolutely important to undertake this evaluation as requested by the WHO resolution. It is an issue of high interest also in my own country. Regarding the points that Japan attaches importance in terms of the evaluation process, one, we attach importance to independence, having an objective and also judgments made based on scientific facts. Second, we attach importance to the expertise and the fairness, which basically we would like member states and experts around the world to be asked for the opinions, and they should be considered appropriately. And third, transparency. We feel that the process of evaluation should be made public and for people to be able to see what is being considered. I will conclude by reiterating Japan's commitment to working together with the WHO and also now to cooperate with the independent panel. In order to work more effectively or work together effectively, I would like to stress the importance of timely sharing of information with member states. And I look forward to our next briefing regarding the evaluation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Japan. May I now invite Switzerland to be followed by New Zealand. Switzerland, you have the floor, please.
Thank you, Chair. Switzerland would like to express our thanks to Dr. Tedros for his leadership and congratulate the two co-chairs of the panel for their nomination. Switzerland also supports the statement just made by the EU delegation. We're committed to multilateralism, solidarity, international collaboration, the international response to the COVID-19 crisis. A weakening of universal participation at the World Health Organization is regrettable. The current crisis shows how vital it is to have a strong and efficient and universal organization committed in the long term. We support an independent evaluation of the WHO health response to COVID-19. In our view, health ministers should also be actively involved in this, and we are looking forward to constructively participate in the process together with other member states. At the same time, together with Botswana, Nepal, and Oman, Switzerland has launched a coalition for universal health protection architecture to contribute to the current discussion on health security. Ladies and gentlemen, the evaluation of the international management of the crisis, including the implementation of the IFHR, constitute a unique opportunity to reaffirm the key role of WHO. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Switzerland. May I now invite New Zealand to be followed by Canada and then Zambia. New Zealand, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, Jude. And I take the floor simply to say that New Zealand welcomes the appointments today by the Director General of Their Excellencies, the Right Honourable Helen Clark and President Sirleaf. And we congratulate them and thank them also for accepting this role. New Zealand is a strong supporter of the WHO, and we supported the evaluations as agreed at the Assembly back in May. So we very much look forward to engaging further as this work progresses and offer our cooperation with this absolutely critical process. So thank you.
Thank you very much, New Zealand. I now invite Canada to be followed by Zambia. Canada, you have the floor, please.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you, Director General Tedros, for this very welcome update on the COVID-19 response evaluation, and heartfelt congratulations on securing the support of such distinguished and accomplished individuals to co-chair the panel. And our thanks go to both of them for this important commitment. We would also, as others have before us, like to emphasize the importance, and I think you've emphasized it, Director General, in your comments, the absolute centrality here of meaningful member state engagement in this process. And we very much welcome the milestones and the roadmap that you have set out today. And it very much welcome the different steps along the way on which member states can be consulted with clear timelines and key milestones. It's important to emphasize here that certainly we, Canada, are not looking for any micromanagement here in this process, but in order to avoid micromanagement, it's important to set out this very clear approach to consultation and to improve our understanding of the process. So we very much welcome your announcements today. There's a great deal of interest, again, as others have said, at home in Canada, in several different government ministries, and we will be working hard to help you and the co-chairs ensure that the evaluation process is evidence-based and that it builds on existing lessons learned, and particularly from the West Africa Ebola experience. And I think we're hopeful that this evaluation process will ultimately strengthen the existing tools in our pandemic preparedness and response toolkit, again, in a spirit of multilateralism, rather than focus on the creation of new structures. And at the same time, I think we are prepared and we will welcome a hard look at how our existing tools have served or not served us in the current pandemic. We're cognizant also that this pandemic, as you rightly emphasized in your opening remarks, is far from over, and particularly for colleagues in the Americas. So we also have to be mindful that this review not detract from all the efforts to continue our response to the existing pandemic. And I think strike a note of optimism, as you said, that the evaluation process can help to reinforce our efforts against the current pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Canada. Zambia, you have the floor, to be followed by Norway and Ethiopia. Zambia.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moderator. Zambia joins the previous speakers to commend the Director General and the whole Secretariat for the support so far in the fight against COVID-19. It's clear that even as we move forward, the need to strike a balance between protecting the lives of our people and also allowing the economies to run has to be adhered to. Director General has provided unprecedented leadership in this fight, and we put it on record that we are very appreciative of the collaboration we've seen in Africa, particularly between World Health Organization and the Africa CDC. It's important to note that the appointment of the review panel has included setting up of an independent secretariat. We commend you, DG, for that. It's also important to note that as we move forward, we need to be inclusive in the way the review is undertaken. The Africa region, represented by countries like Zambia, would want to add a voice to this process because we are aware that COVID-19 has not spared any country. To WHO, this process is a clear manifestation on how we can enhance accountability and transparency in our work, and we commend you for that. The two eminent global personalities who have been chosen as co-chairs require our support, and there is no doubt they are the right persons for this assignment. Zambia therefore fully supports the appointment of this panel, and we look forward to fruitful results so that we can strengthen our response. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Thank you very much, Zambia. I now invite Norway to be followed by Ethiopia.
Thank you, Chair, and let me start by echoing the thanks that have been given to the frontline workers of the response, and also to give our heartfelt thanks to WHO staff and the great effort you are now putting into the response. As you said, DG, we have to be united in these efforts. We would also like to welcome the appointment of these distinguished co-chairs of the panel, and we very much look forward to working with them. We also would like to echo the statements of many of our colleagues, the one from the EU and Canada, when it comes to the importance of having regular member states briefings and engagement with member states in an inclusive and transparent way, including when it comes to reviewing the TORs. And we would welcome more information regarding timelines and milestones in this regard. When it comes to aspects that are important for Norway, we would like, as others, to underline the importance of an independent evaluation. And as others have also indicated, and we would like to draw your attention here to the resolution we passed in May, the objective for this evaluation is to improve capacity for global pandemic prevention, preparedness and response, including through strengthening, as appropriate, the WHO Health Emergencies Program. So it should be clear that this evaluation is done with the aim of strengthening global preparedness and WHO. And finally, we would also have a question when it comes to the special session of the Executive Board, and that would be if there is any further information as for the date of that meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Norway. Ethiopia, you have the floor to be followed by China.
Ethiopia welcomes the announcement by the Director General of this important progress on the evaluation process. We would like to express our thanks and appreciation for the two excellencies for their willingness to co-chair this panel. We have full confidence that the process is going to well benefit from the depths of knowledge and experience of the co-chairs. We also look forward for the successful evaluation process that can further strengthen our systems, our global preparedness and response system for the future. And we call for all member states to respect the independence of this process and to collaborate for the success of this process. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ethiopia. China, you have the floor to be followed by Venezuela.
Thank you very much. At the outset, I wish to thank Dr. Tedros for this very timely and important update, together with the whole set of ideas, including with the roadmap. COVID-19 is a common challenge to the international community. The whole world has been seriously influenced by the profound economic and social impact. This common challenge calls for united multilateral cooperation and a concerted response, which I fully echo Dr. Tedros in his remarks. China appreciates the tremendous efforts made by the World Health Organization especially under the leadership of Dr. Tedros, in bringing together multilateral cooperations in the fighting against the pandemic. China will continue to support the World Health Organization to play a leading role in the implementation of the WHO resolution in an impartial, independent, and a comprehensive manner. We will follow the whole development very closely, and I hope that the member states could be well informed in the whole process so that all of us could be involved in a meaningful manner. China remains ready to work together with the World Health Organization and all parties concerned to join hands with the common efforts to effectively cope with the pandemic. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, China. I now invite Venezuela, and that should be the last speaker. Venezuela, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much. We would like to thank the Director General for the important today. We warmly welcome the nomination of the two distinguished co-chairs, and we'd like to provide our support to their work. We are convinced of the importance of multilateralism. We are very grateful for the support that you are providing to Venezuela. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Venezuela. Chair, that is it for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jude, and thank you very much, Excellencies, colleagues, for your interventions in relationship to this incredibly important announcement today. And thank you again very much to the co-chairs, Your Excellencies, for your interventions. DG, would you like to respond to any of the comments that have been given this morning?
No, thank you. No, I would like to thank to all member states, actually. I will take it as suggestion, advice, and guidance. And thank you so much for your support, first of all, to the co-chairs of the independent panel, and also all the inputs from your side to make the, especially the consultation with member states. So we will continue to consult you on the same. I have already outlined the major milestones, but one thing we believe is your support, your guidance is very, very important. So we will engage you as much as possible, and to make sure that we get all the support we need from you. It's the support we get from the member states that can make this evaluation actually as successful as possible. We understand that, and that's why one of the recommendations, proposals from our side was to have a monthly forum. As you know, we meet on weekly basis, of course, every Thursday. But one of the Thursdays, the first week of the month, will be dedicated to discuss the resolution, not only the independent evaluation, but all the issues related to the resolution from our assembly. So I fully agree that we need consultation, and we need to work really closely together. This is unprecedented, and this is really something that happens probably once in a century. We have said it many times. And drawing lessons from this, understanding exactly what happened, and getting in close touch to understand fully is very important. In addition to the independent evaluation, of course, we didn't want to take much time and divert you away from the independent evaluation, But there is a recommendation, in addition to the independent evaluation, to have a global conversation, to talk to every individual on earth, through the professional associations, through youth associations, through women's associations, through other groupings we have globally, and even talking directly to individuals to understand their voice, because every voice matters. Not only to our member states, we believe that talking to every individual matters. Every voice actually always matters, because this virus has affected all of us. So I would like to assure you that we will do more than actually what you're asking, because we're committed to learning from this situation full-heartedly, in good faith, and really help the world to never face the same problem again. But this is the responsibility of all of us, the whole world. And then on the specific issue you raised on September, the date, I think this was one of the questions from Norway, I think. We have consulted, I have consulted with our board chair, Dr. Vardhan, and we will let you know the dates in the next 1 week. Of course, in our consultation, we have agreed that we need to have a board special session in September, but we left it open. So we will give you the options we have. And I think by next week, we need to decide when that date will be. But for now, we don't have a specific date. We agreed with the board chair only to having a board session in September. The dates will be consulted with you. So these are the issues on transparency. I said it already. Starting from the co-chairs, the selection of the panels, you will be involved on that. And all the rest, which I say the member states will be involved, I think will ensure the transparency. It's the engagement of the member states that can bring transparency. So we will engage you regularly, and you can have your input and support and guidance in every step. We want this to be as really successful as possible, helping the world to know, to understand what exactly happened and why it happened, and what are the solutions going forward. And that should be, I think, everybody's responsibility, but we will make sure that that happens, and we will contribute our share to make that happen. But finally, again, thank you so much for your support to President Sirleaf and Prime Minister Clark. And this is a duo, global leaders who are known to all of you. And I know they will do a good job, an excellent job, to help us understand what happened and the solutions. And I call on all member states to give them their your support. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much again, DG, and thank you again, colleagues, for your comments and engagement on the first segment of today's information session. That was obviously again on the COVID-19 response evaluation process. It is now my honour to move to the second part of today's briefing, and that is an update on the ACT COVAX pillar. I am joined by colleagues Dr. Bruce Aylward and Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, the Chief Scientist of WHO. We also have the pleasure today of Dr. Richard Hatchett, the Chief Executive Officer of CEPI, and again, Dr. Seth Berkley, the Chief Executive Officer of Gavi. In the first instance, so I'd like to hand over the floor to Dr. Bruce Aylward to provide an update and an introduction. Over to you, Bruce.
Thank you very much, Tim. Good day, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. Last week, we provided an overview of the ACT Accelerator, the initiative that was launched the 24th of April by the Director General, as with the President of the European Commission, the President of France, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, with the ambitious goal of accelerating the development and equitable allocation of diagnostics, therapeutics, and vaccines that are needed to end the pandemic in the near term through the reduction of the societal and economic impact, as well, obviously, of the impact this is having on health and health systems around the world. We laid out the bold targets of the initiative, which is to not only develop, do the necessary R&D and market preparedness around these products, but to ensure the development and distribution of 250 million courses of therapeutics, 500 million test kits, and 2 billion doses of an efficacious vaccine against COVID. We explained as well that the work of the ACT Accelerator involves the establishment of no new entities or bureaucracies. It's really almost a repurposing of the international health architecture and some of the leading agencies within it to rapidly achieve these goals. So the work is organized around the 4 pillars, as we explained last week, for each of those 3 products, as well as a cross-cutting health systems connector, and critically an all-encompassing and cross-cutting work stream on access and allocation, which is led by WHO. Today, we're going to start the first of what will be 3 or 4 briefings, as requested by member states, to go in depth on each one of the pillars, joined as we are today by not only the lead from our side, or WHO side, rather, our chief scientist, but also the chief executive officers of, in the case of vaccines, CEPI and Gavi. So today will be the first briefing, and this is going to be on the vaccines pillar, which we refer to as COVAX, as I'm sure some of you will explain to you. And we're going to have Soumya kick off, followed then by Richard and Seth before we go to a Q&A. So with that, Tim, perhaps I can hand straight to Soumya.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Good morning and good afternoon, good evening, Your Excellencies. I'm Soumya Swaminathan. I'm the Chief Scientist, and I'm leading the WHO effort on the COVID vaccines in partnership with Gavi and CEPI, and the 3 organizations together form the pillar to accelerate the development and deployment of COVID vaccines. The goals of today's session are to provide an update on what the whole enterprise is on developing the COVID vaccine, why the end-to-end approach is important, why speed is going to be important, why initial investment in this is going to be important and is going to benefit everyone. And it'll only be successful if all member states come together to support this initiative. So I'd just like to say that why do we need a vaccine? It's clear now from many of the studies that have been done around the world, and what we're learning about the epidemiology of this virus is that despite having caused so much, such a big impact in countries around the world in terms of health and in terms of the economic impact, in most countries where these studies have been performed, a very small proportion of the population has actually got antibodies, which we think might be protective. So the only way to really protect large numbers of the population is to have a vaccine which can be, of course, given to the majority of people, or at least to enough people to break the chain of transmission from person to person. So we will take you through a few slides and then hopefully have some time left over to answer questions and discussion. Equitable access to vaccines is going to be an important aspect. So we will start with why we need a COVAX or a COVAX facility, and I'm going to now request Dr. Seth Berkley, the CEO of Gavi, the Vaccine Alliance, to take us through the next couple of slides. Seth, the slide is up, and are you online? Could we unmute Dr. Seth Berkley, please? Yes, we can hear you now. Thank you.
So thank you so much for that introduction, and I'm delighted to come back to talk to the member states. And there's also a timing issue that'll become clear in this, because not only do we want to help move this forward, working collectively, but we also need you to engage with us. So let me start a little bit, and you've heard a brief introduction. Sorry, could we go? Yes. The critical idea here is that with a fast-moving pandemic, no one is safe unless everyone is safe. And that's an important point, because what we've got now is a situation where countries, rightfully so, are looking to get vaccines to protect their citizens. But if we have a series of bilateral deals, that is not going to be the efficient way of doing it. But also it will mean that a small number of countries will have high coverage, and many countries, if not the vast majority, will have no vaccines. The other challenge here is, given the fact that the a priori probability of success for a vaccine before it starts is around 7%, we're going to have a lot of failure. So the good news right now is that there is a lot of scientific collaboration going on. There's currently probably over 200 candidates in varying stages of development. We don't know fully those numbers, and there are many different databases that show that. And we also have incredible engagement from the private sector to work in the interest of the global public good. So for this COVAX part, the vaccine pillar of the ACT Accelerator, we have industry working with us, both from the industrialized manufacturers as well as the developing country ones. And what we realized is that if we just took a business as usual approach, it would take years. As you know, normally it's 10 to 15 years for vaccine development. So what we're trying to do is really accelerate this, given that we're losing $375 billion from the global GDP. So even moving vaccines forward by, say, 5 or 6 days would pay for the entire enterprise. And what we're trying to do here is move it forward 6 to 8 months. Next slide, please. So the goals of this effort here are to develop the largest and most diverse, actively managed portfolio of vaccine candidates so that the best vaccines are made available and the world has access to the best science. Again, we don't know as of today which candidates are likely to work, and therefore we need to have diversity in portfolio and the types of vaccines, et cetera. The goal would be to manufacture at risk, so that we would be able to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of 2021. Again, a very ambitious goal. And finally, to guarantee fair and equitable access to COVID vaccines for every country in the world. If I can now, let me turn it over to Richard, who will, if you flip to the next slide, will take us going forward.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Soumya, thank you, Seth, thank you, Dr. Tedros, for the invitation, and thank you to the member states. Very quickly, what we want to present today, we want you to understand that COVAX has been put together as an end-to-end solution. So it brings together what is, we believe, to be the world's largest, most advanced, most diverse portfolio of vaccine candidates. We are planning to begin the large-scale manufacturing of vaccine while clinical trials are being conducted. That requires investment. Some of that investment will be at risk because some of the vaccines may not be successful, but by paying what we have termed a speed premium, that means that vaccines will be ready and available for distribution as soon as the clinical data comes in showing that the vaccines are safe and effective. And we have worked very hard to assemble a system that will allow for fair allocation and equitable access to these vaccines in the interest both of equity and ethics, but also in the interest of ending the acute phase of the pandemic as quickly as possible. Next slide, please. To do this, what we are proposing through COVAX is to share risks broadly so that we all take the risks, but that allows us to create a large portfolio of vaccine candidates, which greatly increases the probability of overall success and allows for whichever the first vaccine that succeeds, that begins to be distributed. Then the second vaccine that succeeds, that is distributed to all. So it puts everybody at the front of the line for vaccines as they become available. We have to share the risks of development and share the risks of manufacturing and building out manufacturing capacity so that we can deliver these doses. And what CEPI and Gavi and WHO together will bring, as Seth mentioned, the active portfolio management. That means we are continually looking at the candidates in the portfolio, making adjustments, making decisions, adding candidates to the portfolio if it can help us reduce risk or add capability. So this is not just putting in place purchase agreements, but actively working with the partners to manage their risk and to make sure that their manufacturing can be undertaken at speed. This will cost a significant amount of money, and that is also why we need to pool and work together so that we can address these necessary upfront expenditures to build this portfolio and make sure that it can be expanded and that the manufacturing can begin. And then there will be additional funds over the course of 2021 as vaccines begin to be delivered, again, to continue building out that manufacturing. The numbers are not small. We estimate that the total cost between now and the end of 2021 will be in the range of about $18 billion US. Together, that is a large number. Together, we can divide that and make sure that we can make progress. We need the commitment of both upper income, middle income countries, and certainly to serve the needs of the lower income countries. We all must work together if we are going to succeed. Next slide, please. I want to very briefly present, this is the existing COVAX portfolio. Right now we have funded 9 vaccine candidates. It is a very deliberately constructed portfolio that hedges risk in a number of dimensions. The portfolio is diverse in terms of the kinds of vaccine approaches that we are using. We have viral vectored approaches, we have recombinant approaches, we have nucleic acid approaches, both DNA and RNA. We have deliberately geographically diversified where the vaccines have been selected from. We have 3 from North America, 3 that are being developed in Europe, and 3 that are being developed in the Asia-Pacific region. And we are working to extend the manufacturing from the primary sites, I'll talk about this in just a minute, to additional sites to create a truly globally diversified portfolio of candidates and manufacturing sites. And our portfolio has already achieved significant success. 6 of the candidates that we have funded are now in clinical trials, which begins to reduce the risk of the portfolio. As you advance from each stage of development to the next, the risk is reduced. So we believe this to be a very attractive portfolio, and we are in active discussions with a number of other potential partners that we can add to this. Ultimately, we think we'd like to have 12 to 15 candidates in the portfolio. That would maximally reduce our risk and ensure our probability of success. We are striving to achieve speed in terms of delivering vaccines, scale, delivering hundreds of millions or billions of doses, and to ensure equitable access globally. Next slide, please. The way we are approaching the manufacturing capacity, and this is critically important to understand, if we are going to deliver 2 billion doses by the end of 2021, we will need multiple successful candidates. Those candidates all have primary manufacturing sites. What this slide represents is conceptually our effort to increase the number of manufacturing sites for these vaccine candidates so that there is a global distribution of manufacturing and to begin that large-scale manufacturing as quickly as we can bring these sites online so that we begin to build inventory of the vaccines, even in advance of demonstrating that they are safe and effective. Once the vaccines are demonstrated to be safe and effective, that inventory can be released quickly and shared among all the participants in the COVAX facilities. And we have deliberately chosen facilities so that if a vaccine candidate fails, which several of the candidates undoubtedly will, the manufacturing capacity can be repurposed and turned to another candidate that has proved successful so that we can reuse that capacity to create global capacity and to achieve our dose targets for 2021. I'll now turn this back over to Soumya, who will talk about how we're approaching allocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. If you can go to the next slide. This allocation framework has been developed in consultation and with feedback from all of you. It's been presented to you by Dr. Mariangela Simao over the last couple of sessions. And essentially, it's built on the concept of a fair and equitable allocation of vaccines. As Seth and Richard have explained, the first thing is, of course, to have the investments both in the upstream, the research and development, but also in the manufacturing capacity and the procurement of enough doses. But once we have those doses of vaccines available, how do we make sure that there is fair allocation across countries, across populations, and with the goal of both protecting public health, reducing mortality and morbidity, but also minimizing the societal and economic impact that COVID is having on countries and economies. So the principle is to have an equal allocation done between countries, whether they are low income, low middle income, upper middle income, or high income countries, trying to reach 20% of the population of each country as the first step. So that would be the floor, the bare minimum of what we aim to do. The discussions that have happened over the last few weeks have indicated that the first priority would go to health and social care workers, frontline workers, who are at the highest risk of getting the infection and who really cannot afford to get ill, because that then impacts the health workforce, it impacts the health systems as well. And so the very first tranche of the doses would be to cover about 3% of each country's population that should take care of health and other frontline workers, other critical workers. And the reason to say that it would be done in tranches is to be very realistic and pragmatic. We know that if one or two vaccines are found to be successful in the phase 3 clinical trials, which we hope they will be, that the number of doses that are available early in 2021 are likely to be limited. Perhaps they will be in hundreds of millions of doses, and it's going to take time till we scale up and get to where we can vaccinate large parts of every country's population. So we will necessarily have to think of a way of targeting the segments of the population we consider are the highest priority, and at the same time doing it in a fair way. The next set of, the next tranche would be to go up to 20% of each country's population, and this would essentially cover high-risk adults as they are defined, and this could vary from one country to the next. It could be the elderly, it could be people who have other pre-existing or underlying illnesses or other special groups who are at high risk of mortality due to this infection. And once we get to 20% of the population of each country, then of course the allocation would depend both on the availability of vaccine doses, but could also be tailored to the needs which are based on threats and vulnerabilities. So countries which are having huge outbreaks, which are out of control, which are really impacting the country, might get a preference for additional doses. But this would be once every country has been given enough doses to cover 20% of the population. So I think I'm going to turn it back now to Seth to go through the COVAX facility and how that would work. Next slide, please. And over to you, Seth.
Thank you, Soumya. So on this slide, in this caricature, you see the vaccine supply guarantees in the middle. So the idea would be that there are two sets of financing stream. On the right side of your slide are self-financing country contributions. Those are coming out of upper middle income countries and high income countries who are participants in this facility. On the left, you see the Gavi COVAX AMC. This was launched at the Global Vaccine Summit on June 4th. It was initially capitalized with $500 million, but we're seeking further finance for that, and that will be to help lower and lower middle income countries to be able to purchase vaccines. Together, these, we will keep them separate only because of the need to have accounting differences for ODA-based funding versus, let's say, Ministry of Health funding, but they will be used together to provide the vaccine supply guarantees, which will lead to available doses of successful vaccines. And then, as you can see below, dedicated doses will go to the LICs, LMICs, and IDA-eligible small economies, and then dedicated doses to the high-income countries and upper middle-income countries. As part of this, we are working with industry. Many industry participants have already indicated their preference to try to do this at a cost-plus basis, appropriate pricing during the pandemic. Others have said that they would like some tiering of prices, and we would allow both. What the idea would be to try to have a system set up that would provide appropriate pricing across all of this. Next slide, please. So why does this matter? So first of all, you've already heard the idea would be to be able to control the pandemic as quickly as possible. It would be to try to cover a subset of the population. WHO has worked very hard to look at this, and by providing doses up to 20%, we should have a big dampening of the pandemic globally, not just in a select set of countries. The idea that having a diverse and actively managed portfolio is critical. The science will constantly change. We're going to learn new things, and we're going to want to use that then to adapt the portfolio. The vaccines, as you heard from Soumya, are delivered as soon as they're available. So the idea here is that we'll have a continuous flow as more doses are being manufactured. And of course, when there are successful vaccines, one will try to pivot manufacturing to making more of those. This will lead to the end of the acute phase of the pandemic and will allow an improvement of the economic situation, which we talked about. Next slide, please. So how can you participate? So I've divided this into two groups. On the left side, self-financing countries. You should have received a letter from the three of us, the three organizations, to submit a letter of interest. That is by the 10th of July, that is a non-binding commitment that says we would like to look into this, we would like to be involved in the discussion. We are going to have a consultation then on the 16th and 17th of July where we'll dig into depth on many of the questions that people will have on the governance, on the financing, on the allocation, on indemnification, on a range of issues that are going to be important. The idea, though, would be that by the end of August, we would ask countries to make binding commitments to join the facility. Now, that's important because depending upon how many countries are there will depend upon how many doses and what the investments are going to be like, what confidence we'll have from industry, et cetera. So we will ask 31st of August to have a binding commitment of which there'll be a down payment for the facility, but then purchase those doses when they ultimately are shown to be efficacious and are licensed. On the right side, you see the AMC-supported countries. We've also sent letters out to the missions to let them know that we'll be having a consultation. We would also welcome indications of interest, and there will be a consultation on the 20th and 21st of July. We plan to have one in English and one in French. and then we will ask them to submit an application to join COVAX in the fall, and obviously also for them to have input into these different governance mechanisms. So now let me turn it back over to Soumya to close the slide presentation, and so we can get into some discussion.
Next slide, please. So I think I just want to highlight the fact why this is such a unique initiative, the COVAX, because the three elements of speed, scale, and access, and the whole end-to-end approach means that we start with investments in R&D by accelerating R&D, as Richard explained, by investing in a number of different candidates, by supporting companies to be able to move quickly through the process of clinical trials, then to invest in manufacturing so that you have enough doses of those vaccines that come out successful, and then thinking about equitable distribution and how that could happen through the establishment of the COVAX facility. So the COVAX facility will have access to the world's largest and most diversified portfolio. It's difficult for individual countries to invest in multiple candidates, whereas a combined and a pooled approach could actually help to do that. The fastest way to get to a safe and efficacious vaccine is by investing in manufacturing at risk, so that there's no time lost between the phase 3 results and the scaling up of manufacturing capacity to secure enough volumes and funding. Again, that the power of pooled procurement is to be able to secure doses at the most cost-effective price, to be able to negotiate with the companies to get the best price because of the high volumes, and $2 billion of the funding that's been needed has been secured, but there's still a long way to go to get the rest of the funds that are going to be needed. And then to champion equity through the fair allocation framework that all of you have provided inputs into, and also have an emergency buffer of doses to use for humanitarian settings or other emergency settings that may arise. Next slide, and I'm just going to conclude now with the key elements of this COVAX facility is, first of all, that it's an end-to-end solution. So the vaccine pillar is really looking not only to invest in one aspect of vaccine development, but to ensure that ultimately there are vaccines available for people to use all over the world. Next slide, please. That it is all the elements really need to be funded in parallel in order for this to be successful. The traditional approach of funding one stage at a time we know that it takes sometimes more than 10 years for vaccines to actually become available to people around the world, even though they may be available in a few countries. And so we don't want that to happen. We want to make sure that people all over the world, because we know that every country is suffering from this pandemic, and so access has to be fair, it has to be at the same time. And finally, next slide. We also know that the more countries who participate in this initiative, the higher the chances of success, because we're not only pooling risk, but we're also pooling the chances of getting a successful vaccine at the end and of being able to give it simultaneously to all countries. And so it requires, as the DG says repeatedly, it requires global cooperation, collaboration, and global solidarity. And this is a big challenge before us, but we wanted to present to you the concept, of course, in a very brief but hopefully comprehensive way, and we look forward to your comments and suggestions for taking this forward. And as Seth mentioned, we will have more in-depth country consultations coming up over the next couple of weeks, where we can answer in-depth questions on different aspects of the vaccine pillar. So thank you, and back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Soumya, and also, of course, to Seth and Richard for your contributions, and to Bruce for the introduction. Now over to any questions or comments from Member States participants, and Jude, I'll ask for your assistance in the moderation of the questions. Thank you, Jude.
Thank you very much. I recognize the United Kingdom. You have the floor to be followed by Mexico.
Thank you very much, everybody. I'm sorry, I apologise for not getting the video on time. So just wanted to make a couple of points on behalf of the United Kingdom. The UK is a strong supporter of the WHO, Gavi and CEPI, and the critical work that they're co-leading under the ACT Accelerator. We very much support the work of the Accelerator more broadly. We've already committed financially to the COVAX AMC, which we were very pleased was launched at the Global Vaccine Summit in London on the 4th of June. We believe the best chance we have of defeating COVID-19 is by working together globally. The COVAX facility provides an opportunity to work collaboratively to expedite vaccine development, manufacturing and procurement to secure equitable global access to a vaccine. We fully support Gavi and CEPI's close collaboration as they work towards this aim, including in securing the financing required for an end-to-end solution that will give the world a vaccine at the speed and scale required. We've got two questions from the UK, if that's all right. First, we recognise that between Gavi and CEPI, there are pull investments that make long-term purchasing commitments and push investments that focus on vaccine development and critically invest at risk in manufacturing to ensure supply. Can you say anything about how COVAX would ensure these push and pull investments will work together? And our second question, we welcome the commitment to avoid new governance arrangements, and we wanted to ask if you could say anything about how governance will work for COVAX. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, United Kingdom. Mexico, you have the floor to be followed by Canada.
Thank you, and thank you to the colleagues WHO, CEPI and Gavi for their presentations. We have one question. How does bilateral agreements will affect the price negotiation of vaccines? What worries us is that the COVAX will be competing with either countries with great purchase power or similar mechanisms of a group of countries with also important purchase power. So instead of everyone joining in one single global mechanism that could potentially benefit everyone equally, we will have two or more mechanisms that will decrease the chances of having affordable and equal distribution of health products. So could you please just provide your thoughts on that? We think it's important that you provide some opinion on that in this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Mexico. Canada, you have the floor to be followed by Peru.
Thank you very much. We very much welcome this update today and thank all of the speakers for their leadership in this highly dynamic pillar. As a strong supporter of the ACT, Gavi and CEPI, and of course the WHO, you can count on Canada for our support and engagement to ensure that COVID vaccines, once available, are affordable, accessible and equitably distributed. Along with other donors to Gavi's pneumococcal advanced market commitment, Canada has approved committing up to $177.5 million in unused funds to the new COVAX AMC, helping to ensure low and lower middle income countries will have access to COVID vaccines. We've also joined the Friends of the Facility, co-chaired by Singapore and Switzerland, to work with our colleagues to advocate and promote multilateralism as a necessary approach to ensure equitable access to medical countermeasures. Seth, you spoke to this, but we were wondering if you could expand on how low and lower middle income countries and civil society organizations are being engaged throughout this process, and how is their involvement in government's frameworks of ACT A and COVAX facility envisaged? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Canada. Peru, you have the floor to be followed by New Zealand.
Thank you very much. I'm going to speak Spanish. I hope there's no issues with that. I'm grateful to the WHO and to Dr. Tedros, who spoke at the beginning, and we're also delighted to see Helen Clark, who we'd like to thank for all of her efforts working on the evaluation panel. Now, during the second part of today's information session, I I'd like to extend my thanks to Dr. Berkeley and from Gavi, and I'd like to thank CEPI and the WHO representatives on the COVAX facility. Peru is delighted about the effort being made by the WHO and all international stakeholders participating in this mechanism in order to ramp up the development and equitable access to diagnostic tests, therapies and vaccines for COVID-19. Peru would like to reiterate that medical therapies and vaccines for COVID need to be accessible to all without any discrimination. They should be considered global public assets. Based on this understanding, Peru would like to extend its interest in participating in the COVAX facility with Gavi, CEPI and the WHO. Designing this initiative, we'd like to draw your attention to the unique situation of middle-income countries like Peru, in which there is still an acute need to benefit from better resources to respond to the high demand for medical attention, to reduce the impacts of the pandemic, and to ramp up our capacity to access medical products, including vaccines. I would like to ask the distinguished representatives of Gavi, CEPI and the WHO if they'd be kind enough to give us some additional detail on the global governance structure and the resources for the COVAX facility. I'd also like to ask CEPI about the 2 million doses that will be provided by the COVAX facility following the study will be available to be distributed to countries that participate in the funding mechanism, as well as those that contributed to support to its development. And how will this be then ramped up to provide higher quantities? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Peru. I now invite New Zealand to be followed by Equatorial Guinea.
Thank you very much, Jude. And I can be brief because the question I had raised my hand for has been raised by other speakers now. New Zealand is, like others, keenly following this work, and we're pleased to have submitted an EOI for the facility and to have joined the Friends of the Facility, the group co-chaired by Singapore and Switzerland. And so we wonder if it would be possible to have any further updates on what the intentions are with respect to the governance and coordination of the facility, and specifically how engagement will be conducted with participating countries, including those who are Gavi board members and those who are not. And perhaps you will tell me that this is some of the detail we'll get into in the upcoming consultations later this month. If that is the case, I wonder if we should be expecting any further documentation or other materials ahead of that consultation. And finally, just to say thank you very much for these regular updates. We're very appreciative of them and the work that is going into them. I thank you.
Thank you, New Zealand. Equatorial Guinea, you have the floor to be followed by Zambia.
Good day, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. I'm here speaking on behalf of the Ministry of Health. We would like to show in our appreciation for this great initiative being taken place by the WHO, the Gavi, and other member states. As a nation that is concerned about the health of its citizens, given the current state in which the world at large is facing, and Equatorial Guinea in particular, because we already have positive cases of COVID-19, we would like to indulge our support and that we are into this initiative. For that reason, our country has just signed in our letter of intent with the help of the WHO. We have a question on the price of the vaccine, expecting that the vaccine is going to be affordable for all countries, including both high, middle, and low. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Equatorial Guinea. May I now invite Zambia, which will be the last speaker on my list. Zambia, you have the floor, please.
Thank you very much, the moderator. Again, through this innovation, they also solidarity in the spirit of trying to attain universal health coverage. Mr. Moderator, COVID-19 will be with us for a long time to come, and development of a vaccine is a game changer. We join colleagues in commending Gavi, CEPI, and also the World Health Organization for providing leadership. Africa is a special place. As you are aware, most of the countries in Africa have been slow progressors in terms of COVID-19. The landscape is changing, and we are seeing escalation of new cases and also mortality. It's also important to remember that with financial obligations expected to access the vaccine, COVID has also further worsened the shrinking of the fiscal space. So we need to bear in mind that some of the countries, including Zambia, will continue requesting for some special consideration in the spirit of leaving no one behind. Let me also mention that we need to support the African region, particularly to catalyze participation in research and development. When we look at the 9 projects highlighted so far, I see that Africa is silent. It's important that we look at avenues on how to facilitate research and development in Africa and in the region. Let me also mention that access, affordability, and the quality of the vaccine, as it has been alluded to, is quite key. And lastly, we need to learn lessons from the Gavi support to countries such as Zambia. There's been quite a lot of lessons learned. So even as we move forward, we need to convert those challenges we faced into positive energies for us to attain the objectives we've set ourselves. Mr. Moderator, thank you very much.
I thank you, Honorable Minister. You are indeed our last speaker for this Q&A session. Chair, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jude, and thank you very much to the member states for your questions and comments. I'd like to get the floor back now to Sumya if you would like to respond and also coordinate with your colleagues. Thank you, Sumya.
Thank you, Tim. First of all, I'd like to thank all of those member states that have raised some very important questions and issues and suggestions. This is a work in progress. It's evolving almost on a daily basis, and it has to be co-developed in consultation with all of you. And so we thank you for your intensive engagement and support to this. We've heard the messages loud and clear about the need for both collaboration, but also transparency, the need for equity, to consider low-income, middle-income, and high-income countries' needs, to consider vaccine as a global public good, which is exactly what we are also advocating for. We will also be involving civil society organizations. I think community engagement is also going to be key, because once a vaccine is ready, we also want not just ministries of health, but communities and the recipients of this vaccine to be prepared and to know how the R&D was done and how this vaccine is going to help them rebuild their lives and their communities. So there's a lot of work ahead over the next few months to prepare the different streams, and WHO is focusing on the policy through the SAGE. In fact, the SAGE working group is meeting just now to really start considering how they would do policy development once the vaccine, the results start coming from the phase 3 trials. We also hear the Excellency from Zambia, who made the point of involving Africa. Certainly all continents need to be involved in this process, and we hope that working with CEPI, WHO will be able to engage many countries around the world in vaccine trials for some of the promising vaccine candidates. So I'd like to turn over now to Dr. Seth Berkeley to answer some of the questions around. And back to you, Tim, and then we go to Dr. Seth and Richard. Thank you.
Thank you, Sumya. Sorry to interrupt. We understand that the Chair of the Executive Board, Dr. Harsh Vardhan, the Minister of Health of India, His Excellency would also like to raise a question in relationship to this topic. So if I may, Your Excellency, Dr. Harsh Vardhan, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you. Let me first of all place on record my appreciation to WHO for this great COVAX initiative, and especially I would appreciate Dr. Said, Dr. Richard, Dr. Bruce and Dr. Soumya for this very good presentation, very meaningful presentation. On behalf of India, I have to say that India is deeply involved in development of COVID vaccine, guided by a high-level task force. We have a strong manufacturing base and supply vaccines to 60% of the world's requirements. We will be very happy to collaborate with global dispensation and platforms on COVID vaccine, as we have a strong manufacturing base and also a huge cohort. We have already requested for a deeper involvement and leadership role in Gavi. And finally, a specific question, because we are running against time and we have to get the vaccine as early as possible. What are the fast tracking mechanisms in a situation like this where we have a global pandemic, emergency use authorization, or compassionate use, etc., etc.? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. And with that, I'll now hand the floor to Richard.
Thank you very much. Thank you for all of the questions, all extremely thoughtful. We have been working internally and I believe have certainly provisional answers for many of the questions. I would say that we do, to underscore a point that Soumya just made, co-creation of the facility is critically important, and so we very much look forward to the country consultations and to having the opportunity to discuss these questions at greater depth. I'll answer just a few of the questions that seem particularly germane to CEPI and the activities relating to the portfolio, and then turn to Beth and back to Soumya to address other questions. I'd like to address first the question the United Kingdom asked about the linkage between the push investments, the funding of the R&D, and the pull investments, the advanced purchase agreements, and how they will work together. We actually have designed the system to link those two very closely. In the portfolio of vaccines that I presented, we have already initiated scale-up investments, so to increase the manufacturing capacity and to extend that manufacturing capacity globally for a number of the candidates, not all at this point, but for a number of the candidates. For those candidates where we have made those investments, we have secured access agreements in which the vaccine that emerges from the capacity that is funded by CEPI that we are standing up is dedicated to the COVAX facility as the first customer. So there is a direct linkage between the investments in the capacity that we're creating and the right of the facility to actually buy the output of that capacity up to its entirety. That addresses, I believe, partially the question that Mexico asked about whether COVAX will be competing with other purchasing clubs. In the instances where we have first right of refusal on vaccine, we will not be competing because we will be the first potential customer, and that vaccine would only be released to others in the event that the COVAX facility did not absorb all of the vaccine. However, one thing that we should underscore that I don't think we mentioned during the presentation, the advantage of pooling the purchasing power of dozens or even more than 100 countries will make the COVAX facility a very powerful purchasing unit within the market. And the COVAX facility will be able, it has been designed, it will be able to purchase vaccines from other manufacturers, including those that are not currently in the development portfolio. And we think because the COVAX facility will be able to make very large commitments and procure in very large volumes, that will make it a preferred customer, in fact, for the vaccine manufacturers. And because they'll be buying in large quantities, we'll also be able to secure the most economical price per dose that is possible on the global marketplace. There was a question from Ambassador Alfaro from Peru about the 2 billion doses and how they will be made available and how we can ramp up manufacturing. Our ambition to secure 2 billion doses is based on a very close and careful analysis of the existing portfolio and the probabilities of success based on expert judgment of the different candidates within the portfolio, and very extensive modeling of different potential outcomes of how that portfolio will perform based on our expectations of success. And the 2 billion doses that we are targeting, we believe to be a mid-range estimate for what the existing portfolio is able to produce. And that's inclusive of a number of failures. Once vaccines are shown to be successful, presuming we have the resources through the pooling of finances from the many countries that we hope will participate, we will have the opportunity to scale up the manufacturing for successful candidates as quickly as we can. So I think I would say it's aspirational, but it is certainly our aspiration to enhance the manufacturing capacity and potentially aspirationally even to exceed the target that we have set. There was a question about from the representative from Equatorial Guinea about the price of the vaccines. Let me be very candid with the member states. At present, we can make estimates about the prices of vaccines, but there are critical variables that will actually determine what it costs to produce a dose of vaccine that we do not know yet for any of the vaccines. And that includes the yield of the manufacturing process, the actual dose of vaccine required for each dose, and those things together will become clearer over coming months, and they will differ from vaccine to vaccine. So we won't know the actual price of vaccines for some time. We will certainly keep all of you informed as we gather the data. But we have been discussing various different approaches to pricing with our industry partners, who I should underscore are full partners in the COVAX effort. We have representatives from the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network, as well as representatives from IFPMA that are sitting and participating and are strong supporters of the work that we are doing. And we have discussed a variety of approaches, everything from flat price to nonprofit pricing to tiered pricing. And it is our absolute intent to ensure that the vaccines will be affordable for the world during the acute phase of the pandemic, and that we create structures that allow for vaccine to continue to be affordable once the pandemic is brought under control. The last question that I want to answer is about the question from the gentleman from Zambia about supporting African research and development. And yes, you're correct that we don't have any vaccine candidates being primarily developed in Africa, but we have been working with partners in Africa. We know that of at least 2 candidates in the portfolio that will be tested in clinical trials in Africa, and we have been in discussion with African manufacturers, and I did mention the critical role of the Developing Country Vaccine Manufacturers Network in our work as a critical partner. Perhaps I can turn this over to Seth to answer some of the other questions. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Richard. Now I get the floor to Seth.
So thank you. Thank you, Richard, and thank you for these excellent questions. Let me just start with a high-level point to re-emphasize here, which is this is moving very quickly, and we are co-creating this. And the reason I say that is we want countries to engage. If countries don't engage, at the beginning of this, we will not be as successful in driving this forward. And those countries that aren't engaging will not be part of this and will not have access to vaccines unless they can buy them on the open market, which will be limited for a period of time. So this is a very important part of what we're trying to do now. To the questions on governance, the ACT Accelerator concept was to not create new mechanisms of governance. So right now, CEPI has a board and an investor council. Obviously, WHO has this body and its governance mechanisms, and Gavi has a board, a committee that works on doing these types of deals and other structures as well. Clearly, though, we have a problem because the new investors into this would not have a seat at any of those tables. So we are in the process of trying to think on how we might create some type of mechanism to give voice to those investors and to have those investors then be able to engage with the other governance mechanisms as necessary. So to the question from Canada, UK, as well as New Zealand, yes, those will be the topics that will be discussed in the briefings, but also these are topics that have to be discussed, for example, with the Gavi board, because we're going to need to cross-check any solutions on both sides, including a full analysis of risk, how one handles finance, how we make sure the deal-making, allocations, all of those other questions. But the point I would make is that this is something that really is not going to wait. If we do a normal process taking 2 years to build a new structure and moving forward, all of the vaccines will be purchased by countries, and there will be none available for countries that aren't able to do that. So this really has to move quickly. A question from Peru was, would the doses that have already been purchased or agreements that have been made be included in the facility? The facility has not yet been fully formed, but the expectation is we would try to include all of the doses in the full facility. But again, this is part of working through the structure and having a discussion on that. India asked the question or made the point on their incredibly important role to play in vaccine manufacturing. They also have a very large R&D with WHO. We've met with all of the companies in India to understand what they're trying to do, their production, and to work together to try to accelerate these vaccines for India and beyond. So I think these types of conversations are going to be very important. In terms of the global public good argument for vaccines, I think we have to understand, we all understand, given the goal to try to have herd immunity, that would make sense. But we also do have to understand that these vaccines are being developed by private companies. And that's why having their engagement on this, and let me remind everyone that those companies also have an incentive to try to seek global supply. Because if they provide vaccines to 1 or 2 or 3 countries and the rest of the world is left without that, those are their future customers. There is a PR issue, et cetera. So I suspect we will see good engagement, as Richard has talked about, and that's part of the process of having these constant discussions going forward. I will just finish with reminding everyone that Gavi now supplies the 11 vaccines that WHO recommends to about half of the world's population, and we have been able to do that at a price point that is, 95% less than that as the commercial price point. And that shows the power of working together, working with manufacturers to try to drive forward vaccines. And we would expect in the long term to create, if the vaccine is necessary, a healthy vaccine market that would allow people to be able to afford it at the different levels of their economies. But of course, this is going to require active work, and we can't start at the beginning with any guarantees until we engage in those types of activities. So thank you all for that, and let me turn it back over to Soumya.
Thank you very much, Seth and Richard. I hope that we have been able to answer the majority of the questions, and of course, many of your comments will be taken into consideration in the next phases of the development of this COVAX facility. Just to respond also to the question on fast-tracking mechanisms and how to reduce the timelines, it's exactly our goal to be able to do that, not just by accelerating the R&D, but also through the different phases of clinical trials. So the regulatory department and the pre-qualification department here at WHO has been engaging with the many of the manufacturers and developers of vaccines to explain to them what are the procedures that are going to be followed, both for emergency use listing as well as for pre-qualification of vaccines as they get developed. And this is very helpful and useful because then developers know beforehand what the criteria are going to be that will be assessed for an EUL or a PQ listing. And furthermore, WHO is also engaged with many of the regulatory networks globally to discuss and to try to harmonize the criteria which the regulators will employ for licensing vaccines within their own jurisdictions. So I think these are very critical steps, important steps to ensure that as vaccines become available, you have the policy side, the SAGE that is geared up to provide the policy, as well as the pre-qualification or the emergency use listing and the regulatory side, so that regulatory agencies are also geared up to provide the authorization for use of vaccines within their own countries. I don't know, Bruce, if you want to add anything towards the end. I'll turn it over to Bruce before we close the session. But once again, thank you so much for all of your inputs and your cooperation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Soumya. Thank you very much, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for the comments. Special thanks to our guest presenters from outside of WHO, the CEOs of CEPI and Gavi. No doubt there were many other questions that people may not have raised or you'll reflect on the next couple of days. Please feel free to put those through myself or Soumya. We also have an actaccelerator@who.int email address that we use to try and help member states field questions to whomever you need to address them to among the partner agencies to this initiative. In addition, if you have suggestions, Tim, as we discussed, there will be, we will line up for each of the pillars to present the work to you over the coming weeks, as well as the work, of course, on the allocation framework. But if member states have specific suggestions as to what you would like to hear next or what would be most helpful, please do send them through us, to us or through governing bodies, and we will adjust the schedule accordingly as we go forward. There were a couple of comments, for example, on allocation of diagnostics, therapeutics, and these are issues that we would get you briefed on as we go forward, if that is helpful to you, the member states and others on the call. With that, thank you very much. Tim, back to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce. Thank you, Soumya, and thank you again to Dr. Richard Hatchett from CEPI and Seth Berkley from Gavi. With that, I thank everybody who has participated today, excellencies, colleagues, friends. A very big session today. Thank you for indulging us with the extra time. We're coming up now to almost 3 p.m. in the afternoon, Geneva time. with that, I will bid you a very fond farewell for today. We look forward to seeing you here next Thursday at 12:30 Geneva time for a information session on COVID-19, and we will go back to the format of having our member states present on their experiences next week. So with that, again, thanks to all the colleagues here, and I wish you a very good evening, night, or very early morning, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you.